Weight gain, night sweats, mood swings, hot flushes. Not for me, and thank God for that. I feel for those who experience such symptoms of perimenopause. In this episode of Me and My Health Up, we'll be exploring perimenopause and helping you or a loved one navigate through it in the best possible way. I'm your host, Anthony Harcher, a healthy man, according to my kids, aka clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being. And today we'll be chatting with naturopath and natural menopause expert Brenda Rogers on perimenopause, aka premenopause. This is a part one of a two-part series on empowering women naturally through menopause. Brenda Rogers is a natural medicine expert specializing in menopause. She's passionate about working with the new generation of women who are creating an empowering new paradigm for what midlife looks like. Women as a powerful ambassadors for the wisdom of the middle age. Brenda is a clinical naturopath, certified life coach, certified clinical aromatherapist, yoga, meditation, and spiritual teacher. Brenda helps women who want to transition gracefully through menopause and into the best years of their life to become the steady, calm woman who doesn't get riled by anything and celebrates all of who she is. So, welcome, Brenda. How are you today?
Oh gosh, I'm fantastic. Thank you, Anthony, and thank you for having me talk about this really amazing topic.
Yeah, it's such an important topic. I was doing consults prior to this podcast, and the questions were around perimenopause. And I said, "Oh, I'm about to interview an expert, so just hold on, hold on a minute, and we will answer all those questions and more." So I'm going to share this episode with the client. So first, before we start, I always like hearing the I guess your story as to how you have arrived at what you're doing today.
Well, that's a long story, but the shortened version, I suppose. In my early 20s, I was looking for a career. What am I going to do with my life? And I discovered naturopathy and moved to Sydney to study with the Nature Care College way back then. And immediately, once I graduated, started working for Blackmores and had a great time there, just, you know, learning so much about well-being. And then through my career, I had these times of working in corporate health companies and dabbling in my own practice. So I wasn't really ready to practice full time. I wanted to travel and do all those life things. And really, in the last few years, I've gone back to it completely, given up the corporate jobs, which, that's a whole nother story. And then decided to niche with the 45 to 55-year-old women's health, which of course includes menopause and perimenopause. So, and I absolutely love it. I've discovered so much, and it relates back to my yoga philosophy, to herbal medicine, grassroots earth medicine philosophies, to nutrition and what we do in the kitchen. It's just yeah, captures it all for me. So I'm absolutely loving it.
I remember Steve Jobs saying in one of his speeches that he just followed his heart throughout his career. And when he looked back, he could see the dots joining together as to how he's arrived at what he ended up doing. But, at the time, he didn't know, he didn't know where it'd end up. And he just really followed where his heart took him. And it sounds like you've very much done that. And the heart's,
Yeah.
taking you to this special space where you're specializing in, you're an expert, and you really love what you're doing.
Well, I had struggled a little bit with that word expert, but I figured, well, I've got expertise, so that makes me an expert. But I think it's actually a good point that you make, Anthony, because I'm in my mid 50s now, And I look back similarly and think it didn't make sense in my 20s, it didn't make sense in my 30s, but it really, really makes sense now in my 50s. But back then, it was like, oh, I'm not doing the right thing. I don't have what other people have. And what's beautiful about being in your 50s is in some of my research, they say that you're really an adult at 50, that all of the lead up to that, you're not really an adult. And I'm starting to get what they mean. But it's also a beautiful time for women as well, particularly, that everything comes together and we start to have this capacity for real leadership, for real contribution, for real, to create something that really brings us joy. And that's not the common narrative out there. The common narrative out there is that menopause equals decay and decline. In fact, I read a research paper, several of them, analysing the medical perspective on menopause, and these words, decline and decay, came up consistently. And I'm thinking, well, that's not my experience. But 10 years ago, if you'd asked me about it, I probably would have thought, yep, that's about right. It's just all bad, all downhill from 50 or whatever. And, I'm really excited about rewriting that narrative for women so that they get the opportunities, they get how powerful and empowering and wonderful it can be eventually. Eventually, perimenopause is not fun though.
So, I'm really keen to rewrite that narrative on today's podcast, and certainly debunk the myths out there, and the parrot that and shift that paradigm that's currently in society about perimenopause. And you see it for what it is in terms of, yes, it's a challenge to move through and navigate your way through, and you've obviously, over with your experience, come up with a great path that really helps and serves women through those tough years, so that they get out at the other end unscathed and really empowered and at the peak of their life. So I'm really keen to, let's start with what is perimenopause, because I've mentioned it a lot of times, you have, and I just want to get the definition on the table and be clear as to what it is.
Yeah. Well, when you hear the word, let's pull it apart. When you hear the word peri, think of a periscope, which is kind of looking around. So peri is the word around, and some of the authors and mentors and experts that I follow say that it's the 2 to 10 years prior to the cessation of the period. And some will say it includes that cessation of the period and maybe a year post the cessation of the period. So it doesn't really matter. It's primarily that bumpy ride of up to 10 years, we're told, where the hormones are fluctuating quite a lot. There's a gradual and then quite a significant decline in estrogen and progesterone particularly, and the symptoms associated with that. So menopause, to distinguish between that and perimenopause, is 1 year after your last period. So that's 1 day in your life is menopause. Mind you, when you read about menopause or we're talking about menopause, most people mean perimenopause, that whole time. And then postmenopause is all the way up to death, really. Other words that we might use is premenopause, but basically a 20-year-old woman is premenopause. So it's not specific enough. And then you've got early menopause, and early menopause is if you're younger than 40 and you're in menopause prior to 40. And that's usually sort of medical conditions or surgical removal, cancer treatment and that kind of thing. So perimenopause is just those few years few bumpy years leading up to the end of the period.
And is it something that's quite difficult for medicine to diagnose? Is it a bit of grey in the medical diagnosis? Because I certainly, the client I saw today was saying, she's feeling all the symptoms and experiencing, and she feels like she is going through some hormonal change, yet, the doctors are saying, no, you're not.
I've had plenty of people like that too. And who are you going to believe? I mean, we operate in a medical system that is, and I'm going to use the word patriarchal, even though that's a loaded word, but it is, even research is done on male rats, Anthony, because female rats have a cycle, which makes them unpredictable. And we want to eliminate unpredictabilities in research. So, and the blood, there's no blood test for diagnosing menopause. You could do your hormones, and they could say, you could look at FSH and LH and estrogen and estradiol and those kinds of things, and it will tell you, but maybe tomorrow it's different. Maybe at the end of the month it's different. Maybe on the full moon it's different. So there isn't a definitive test for menopause, and that's because it doesn't fit very well into our current sort of construct. We have a peak fertility time in our lives, and it's probably 18. And then there's this sort of gradual decline, and then more rapid decline of reproducibility in the 40s. And so, when you can test at any time along that pathway, and until the periods actually finish, you're only getting a snapshot. You're only getting a sense of it. I totally believe a woman, if she says, and the typical symptoms are hot flushes and night sweats, then there's a million others. Waking up in the middle of the night. See, the problem is we've associated tons and tons of symptoms with menopause. And in many of them, menopause isn't, or hormone fluctuations isn't actually the culprit. So menopause is much worse. It looks much worse than it actually is. And, that's getting more complex into discussion about symptoms. And I don't know if you want to go there yet, Anthony. But certainly I like to teach women to trust their own bodies. And, it's not like ignoring the blood tests, but if you feel like there's hormones fluctuating, then there's hormones fluctuating. That's my philosophy.
And I'm 100% with you, Brenda. I believe the woman in front of me, and the patient knows, or the client knows best, that they know themselves. They have that intuitive instinct, and I'm certainly with you. We need to listen to them and help them with what they're experiencing. So let's get into that side of helping them. How do you help women navigate through this perimenopause period?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, there's everybody's menopause, every woman's menopause is an endocrine challenge. And I know you know what I mean by that. What I mean, let me just explain. Endocrine system is the hormone system, and it's not just our reproductive hormones. It also includes our stress hormones, thyroid hormones, and the pituitary and hypothalamus, which regulate all of that stuff. For every woman, menopause is, or perimenopause is, an endocrine challenge. Every woman. No one gets through it unscathed. No one, and you're not meant to. It's meant to change you. It's a rite of passage. You're going from being a reproductive woman through this, transition into a wild woman. It's actually a wild time, your 50s, and eventually wise woman. So you're kind of a wild, wise woman in your 50s, but you're no longer reproductive. And there's loss associated with that. There's grief associated with that. There's, all the things I haven't done comes up. There's the babies I didn't have. Maybe you haven't had any. That was the case for me. I had a miscarriage. I had wanting to fall pregnant, and I had to deal with all of that grief that it was never going to happen. And so you're not meant to get through it unscathed. It's meant to change you. It's meant to squeeze you into this new woman that you're becoming. So navigating it's really dependent on the individual woman. Some women go through it more easily than others, and there's about 100 different factors as to why that happens. It has a lot to do with how well you've taken care of yourself up to that point. So I like to have this conversation with women who are 35 and 40, because if you can get your health really sorted out before you hit 45 or 49, you're in a much better position to ride that endocrine roller coaster better than someone else who's got insulin problems, got blood sugar problems, who's got, who's stressed out, their adrenals are every bit of adrenal juice has been squeezed out and used up, because those women are not going to sleep. They're going to put weight on. They're going to get anxious. They're going to struggle. So supporting adrenal health is one of the most critical parts of preparation and ongoing maintenance for perimenopause. And that will minimize symptoms. The other thing is liver health. So, if you think about hot flushes, for example, and night sweats, or hot flushes in particular, there's not a lot that we know about hot flushes. We know that it's called a vasomotor symptom, which I think technically means it's not really a hormonal symptom. It's more that nervous system, vascular blood circulation, temperature, brain thing going on. But hot flushes are one of the most common symptoms, and they're often an early sign that you're in perimenopause. And there are quite a lot of reasons why you can have hot flushes, and often it's a compounding thing. But liver health is absolutely critical. So the liver is what detoxifies hormones out of our body, especially xenoestrogens or fake estrogens, the ones that we eat, the ones that we take in the pill, the ones that are in our food, like hormones are in fish and in animals that we eat, and there's hormone mimicking chemicals in the food chain as well. So it's the liver that has to process all of that to help us stay normal and natural. And if the liver is sluggish or unhappy, what I call an unhappy liver, struggling, then we'll have this toxic load in the body. And, when you've got a lot of things going on, and then you've got the stress of the hormonal change, you've got the psychological stress of the psychological journey of perimenopause, and then you're not drinking enough water, or you're having a little too much alcohol to cope with your stress, and maybe a little bit too much chocolate, a bit too much coffee, and these are all very common things, then you've got this perfect storm for not just hot flushes, but symptoms, lots of symptoms.
Yeah, so I'd like to break it down into those three parts. So you mentioned the mind, and in particular, I'm referring to the emotional roller coaster that women go on. And then there's the adrenal support that you mentioned, and then liver detoxification. So, yeah, I'd like to just touch on those three areas and what women can do in each of those three areas to best nurture themselves so that they have the best possible trip through perimenopause, and I guess not make it such a hairy roller coaster journey.
Yeah. Where would you like us to start, Anthony?
Let's start with the emotions, because I think that's, you touched on it as well, like, because if our emotions are unregulated or all over the place, we often go to those comfort things such as alcohol. Helps us suppress our emotions or takes them away, or chocolate, and they're the things that are going to contribute to weight gain. And no women wants to gain, and no one likes to gain weight and look different in terms of their figure. So yeah, so let's start with the, or top down, so to speak. So let's start with the emotions, liver, and then the adrenals. Or if the emotions go with the adrenals, or if they all
Yeah. We are
So,
complex. We
yeah.
are super complex. Well, first of all, the hairiness, the scariness of menopause is because we're unprepared. And there isn't education in our culture about what's actually going on. And that's why that's why I'm loving educating people about this rite of passage and this psychological journey that we're on, because it awakens women to, it's like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. Um, it taps into cultural issues like how we value women. So women are highly valued in our culture when they're young and beautiful. And so when we're hitting our 40s and 45 and close to our 50s, we're starting to contemplate aging. We're having to confront aging in a culture that doesn't very much value older women. If you think about the words that have been corrupted for the honorable role of women post 50, things like hag, crone, you could probably think of half a dozen others. I can't think of any others right now, but these imply this redundancy, this invisibility, this uselessness. We've passed our use by date, and that's so wrong. That's so wrong. In fact, it's the absolute opposite of right. Um, in fact, the only other species that menstruates and has menopause, sorry, not menopause, not menstruates, but has menopause, ceases to menstruate at some point in their lives, are whales. And there's a lot of research done on whales for this reason. And what they've discovered is that the female older whales that cease menstruation become the leaders of the community. Gives me goosebumps, because they're no longer having to worry about reproduction. They've done their job. They are no longer, their bodies no longer need the energy of reproduction, which is quite an energy hungry process for our bodies. They've been around the block a few times. They know where the pitfalls and where the sharks live, and the cold waters and the rapids that they shouldn't go into. They know all of that stuff. They've got the experience of looking after the young, and they are beautifully positioned to be in this holistic leader, this conscious, compassionate leader, in whatever form that takes. For women, it might be, being a professor at college. It might be running a business. It might be starting a charity. It might be stepping into a more of a leadership role as the matriarch of the family, the grandmother, or, all of those things are the natural role for women at that age. And becoming a leader is quite a squeezy process. We have to condition ourselves to be able to handle the stress, to be able to handle the responsibility. And so this rite of passage is really testing us a lot in that. So in terms of the psychological journey, there's a lot of cleanup that happens at menopause. And I think this happens for men as well. Men have their menopause or their andropause. It's happening a little bit more slowly, but certainly there is the decline of testosterone and the impacts that testosterone have on the man. And it's similar with the woman. So the other part of it is, when we talk about emotions, Anthony, is that estrogen has an effect on our psychology. If you think about what happened to us when we're teens, it hijacks us, it takes over. But estrogen is considered the hormone of compliance. It's considered to be this sort of veil descends upon us where taking care of others becomes more important than taking care of ourselves, or in addition to taking care of ourselves. And that's where that motherly instinct comes from. It's all about the survival of the species. And that starts to thin, that starts to disappear. So instead of being, darling, what can I do for you? Suddenly it's get it yourself, So this can be quite confronting, because it's like this anger pops up, and rage even for some women. And it's like, we're not well equipped for dealing with these strong emotions. Women are sort of taught to keep all that down. We don't like angry women. And so if you're experiencing that yourself, it can be very confusing and confronting, because you don't understand what it's about and that it's actually normal. The other thing about the emotional roller coaster is that, and this taps into the physical well-being part of it, and that is, if your adrenals are shot, one of the signs of unhealthy adrenals is anxiety. And anxiety and blood sugars are connected. And so if you have a little bit of insulin resistance, if you're overweight because of a carb addiction or a carb craving, if your blood sugars are all over the place, then your tendency when you enter this period will be anxiety. Not only because it's such a strange time and most women don't know what they're entering into, but the biological component of it is a challenge as well, because of the blood sugars and the adrenal fatigue. So, we are, and that's what's beautiful about being a natural therapist. And you're like this as well, Anthony. You understand holism, which is mind, body, and spirit. It's the psychology and the person that you are. It's all important in all of this. It's your social environment. It's your physical environment, like the amount of toxins in your environment. It's whether you're happy in your relationship. And when the man is going through menopause and the woman's going through menopause, that's a recipe for real challenge in a relationship. And then you've got relationship stress on top of everything else. And I do a lot of work with women who are struggling in their relationship. And when they don't understand this process that they're going through, and also what their man is going through as well, that's conflict just there. And in a nutshell, I'll say that women are coming out from the home and wanting to be out in the world. And men are going from being out in the world and wanting to be more in the home. That's a gross generalization, but you get the sense of it. And it's because of the relative levels of our androgens and our hormones. We're driven by our hormones. We think it's us, but it's not. It's our hormones. And so when we understand all of these things impact our health, our physical well-being, a hot flush isn't just maybe not drinking enough water so that our bodies can regulate temperature. It's maybe not just about how healthy the liver is and how well we're detoxifying hormones out of the body. It can also be little hits of adrenaline because of the anger that we feel that we're not expressing. And that, I think that's one of the most common causes of hot flushes. I don't have any evidence to back that up, so that's just my opinion. But we know that hot flushes are this little hit of adrenaline. And often I'll ask women, what's the thought that you had just before? Because you can tell it's coming on, you can really feel it. And then, get curious about, what was the thought that you just had? And, who were you thinking about? And who do you want to shoot, because that's how it feels. And when you start to normalize that and acknowledge that, it doesn't feel so crazy. Women have a reputation for being crazy at menopause for a reason. Even the word hysterectomy comes from the word hysterical, and it does feel like that. And my goal in talking about hysterectomies, I'll just add this in, Anthony. I think it's very important for us ladies to keep our anatomy. That I don't have anything against women who choose to do HRT and who choose to do hysterectomy, because it's awful if you're flooding every month, and it's been that way for 5 years. Get it taken out. Oh my gosh. But if our culture would let women know in the first instance, there's 10 things you can do if you're heavy period, if you've got heavy periods. Try all of these first before you get everything taken out. Try all these things first before you take synthetic and artificial hormones. They're there if we need them. But my goal in educating women is, let's do these simpler things first. Let's understand. Let's have a conversation about what's going on. Let's do the low intervention things first. And so these beautiful gifts and inherent benefits of this process are gifted upon a woman. Because if you're taking HRT into your 70s, you never really reach that point. That's my rant a little bit about it. That's that I'm so passionate about this, and it's quite a deep conversation. But it's absolutely fascinating. Did I answer all your questions there about adrenals, emotions, and liver?
And a whole lot more. So yeah, really appreciate. It certainly wasn't a rant. It was a great piece of education, and you certainly empowered me. And I think certainly listeners will feel very empowered by what you've just said, because it is that lack of education that you touched on, the lack of understanding, and the and that becomes a societal lack of understanding, and we don't deal with it well. And you mentioned like relationships are really affected because not only we don't understand menopause, we don't understand, or there's not a lot of knowledge around menopause. And as you said, the two together are like fuel to a fire. And that whole concept that you explained about women being at home and now wanting to get out, that's the behavior that the hormonal change is driving, and men are experiencing the reverse of that. That's a recipe for challenges. So there's so many great points that you've touched on, and I really liked how you really honed in on that education piece, and made us more wiser around what women are experiencing, with perimenopause. And I think the earlier point you made was this societal view of women being old, and you've come out with some names which are terrible, and I don't want to repeat them. But we need to shift that paradigm of how we see this period, and see it as the whales do, as women. This is when they're going to hit peak leadership. This is when they're going to do great things for society, and really propel society forward. And you certainly see women in that perimenopause, menopause age really excelling on all fronts. And it's something that we should really, not have this tall poppies syndrome view to it. We should really support the women. And I just wanted to get on to that topic of support, because me being a male, and I hope the male listeners are still there, because it's so important for us to understand and be educated in this, just as just as equally as the females. But what do you suggest the partners, the husbands, um, the brothers? Because we feel that we don't understand it, and we don't generally, and it's what is the best thing we can do to really help a women and support them through this journey?
Great question. Great question. And first of all, I'm thinking about putting a webinar together for teaching men about menopause. And I'm going to do that actually, because there's a lot that you can do. Um, just a little trigger alert here. I want to give you a statistic for those who are a little sensitive. You may just want to pause for a little bit. But the highest suicide rate for women occurs between age 45 to 49. And the second highest rate is 50 to 54. So you're looking out for depression. Because when you can't handle all of this stuff, when you feel like you're going crazy and you feel like you want to leave your kids and leave your husband and go and meditate in India for the rest of your life, that doesn't feel that good. And what happens when we can't really deal with emotions is we end up suppressing them, and that leads to depression. So, if your wife or mother or whatever is happy and laughing about her hot flushes and she's fine, then that's okay. Let her go through it. But if she's not coping that well, then she needs to get help, and she might need someone else outside of her to say, you need to get help. Because one of the typical things is that we're in denial. Not only are we in denial, but we minimize our discomfort. If they've shown it in research, you ask women, to rate their discomfort, and it's like, even though they haven't slept for 12 months, it's like, they're just used to coping with it. Women are used to getting on with it, right? But that has an impact. And so I think that men can be observers and witnesses, and in that sense as well, listen. Listen. One of the biggest things women at this age need is someone to listen to them and to just get it without having to fix it, which we all want to do, right? Not just men. We all want to, it's like, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? And that's nice and that's caring. But letting there be a space for her to talk about what's going on. There's so much taboo around it still. It's come out in the last sort of 10 years now. There's a lot more conversation about it, but only at the surface. We're talking about hot flushes, maybe, but there's a lot more going on deeper in a woman's body than just hot flushes. That I have clients who talk to me, and I'm the menopause expert, so to speak, and they even don't tell me about intimate details of what's going on in their bodies because of the taboos. And so, husbands and partners are really important in this whole process. And if you value your relationship, you'll do it, because the highest divorce rate is also mid-40s because of this transition. And we really don't understand the huge impact that menopause has and perimenopause has on a woman's life and on a relationship and on a couple's life, family lives. So they're the key things that I would say. I would say, stress management is really important. So taking her on a holiday and insisting that she goes on a holiday, insisting that she starts to bring a bit of yin into the yang of her life, maybe starting up some yoga, or a day a month go on an adventure around, even a train trip to Terrigal or something, just to get away from the business and away from work. She probably won't want to, but for your mental health days, those kinds of things are something couples can do together. And then, men doing their own process, doing their own, making sure they're also healthy and on a path to wellness, and mental health wellness as well, because that's not good for men either. The rate mental health statistics for men are not that great either. So, as much as they can, doing that together.
Yeah, some great points there, and I think that stress management, that going to more the yin, or balancing the yang with the yin, so the busyness with the calmness, and self care. Is really important in terms of that overall helping the body just to maintain some sort of balance, given that there's so much going on. I just keen also just to touch on there'll be employers or managers that are listening in that either have employees that are going through this. Is there something that we should be doing from a workspace, work environment, scheduling of activities, or, obviously there's education is key, and there's not enough and we need more of it. Is there anything else that, managers or people in the workplace could do to support women going through this phase?
Buy a fan. That's a joke, but it's also true. Women sitting at their desk having a hot flush, they need a fan. Simple as that. But there's actually a lot of progress happening in this space in the UK. I've been following that for a little while, and it's coming into regulations now, being able to have sick leave for menopause. So, employers really need to get informed. HR managers, employers do need to get informed, because there's going to be a revolution in this. It's happening in the UK, and we'll get it here eventually as well. So you can take a day off for PMS or period pain, and that counts as sick leave. And it'll be similar with menopause, but menopause goes on for years, so that's going to be expensive. So education is, you're right, that's a critical element. And it's not just educating the women, but educating the managing director, female or non-female, the HR manager, and making sure that they have some sympathy for the process. The thing about women at this age is they often leave their jobs because they're going through so much distress and change. They don't feel understood and heard and listened to and supported. And you've got this amazing resource that ups and leaves because there's little accommodation for the few years that she needs to sort herself out. And so, some compassion for that would be wonderful. My release from corporate happened at that age. There was really no understanding or accommodation for what I was going through. And so, I started my own business, which I love and adore, but, there are women whose career paths are in the corporate environment, and you don't want to lose that resource. So that's some things that can be done.
Absolutely. I think you covered it well. It's essentially, as you said, it's their rite of passage, and they go into, this wild phase. But if you help that woman through that wild phase of their life, they're going to get the return, as you said, when they hit that wisdom, that wise, and where they're at their strength in terms of energy and leadership. And so the return on investment for employers is there if they can help them navigate successfully through those more wilder years. And I think it's worth the investment, because, as you said, they're by then they're got lots of experience behind them, and they're about to hit their peak. So why would you want to lose them just before the peak of their career, really?
Yeah. And we're going to talk more about that in part 2.
Yeah.
But that awareness is key.
Awesome. Yeah. And a great segue to part 2 that will be up and coming, which is more the post-menopause years, and how to best support women, and women, how do they can best help themselves through that period. So, Brenda, I'm just keen to get any final words or your top 3 tips for people that are entering this, or about to enter, or totally in the middle of it all. What would your top 3 tips be?
Well, it does end, and if you're still cycling and you're experiencing all of these symptoms, menopause is actually gentler. So hang in there. That would be my tip number one. Tip number two would be curious. Be curious about your body, what it's trying to tell you. Be curious about this time of life and what you can learn about it. Be curious about who's out there that might be able to support you. Sometimes it is a really great female GP or even male. If they're not helpful, if they tell you that you're not going through anything, go to someone else, find someone else, get a second opinion. And my third tip would be manage your stress.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for sharing that wonderful concluding remarks and all the wisdom that you've imparted with the listeners and viewers. I've certainly empowered my outlook and in terms of what I can do from a male perspective to support my partner, to support other women that are going through this period. And I think, it's in the listeners and viewers' best interest to share this episode with others that they know that are going along this journey with them, and to, I guess, share it with the younger generation, because Brenda shared that fantastic tip. Is it will be a lot easier journey through perimenopause if you've really looked after yourself in the younger years. So I suggest, for those young ones that are listening, keep looking after yourself, because what we've discussed today will become easier and it won't be as wild for you. So, if you liked the episode, please share it with others. Leave a review. And I'd just like to thank Brenda again for coming on the show. And for the listeners and viewers, stay tuned for more insightful episodes of Me and My Health Up, and in particularly part 2 of this wonderful series around empowering women through a natural way through menopause. Thank you.